The Fitbit recorded everything. Every step Connie DeBate took that morning, every movement, every spike in her heart rate. The small fitness tracker clipped to the waistband of her yoga pants was still syncing data to her phone when police arrived at the house on Birchview Drive. Her husband, Richard, was on the kitchen floor, zip-tied to a folding chair, bleeding from what appeared to be stab wounds. He told firefighters a masked intruder had attacked him. His wife had tried to help, but she was in the basement. They found Connie at the bottom of the stairs, shot twice, once in the back of the head, once in the torso. A Ruger .357 Magnum revolver lay nearby. Richard's story was dramatic. A home invasion 2 days before Christmas, a violent struggle with a camouflage-wearing attacker, a brave wife who paid with her life trying to save him. Connecticut State Police secured the scene and began piecing together the evidence. Richard repeated his account with conviction. The masked man, the knife, the desperate fight. But investigators had something Richard didn't know about. That Fitbit on Connie's waistband had been tracking her movements with digital precision. And the data told a very different story than her husband. Connie DeBate was 39 years old. She grew up as Connie Margada before marrying Richard on July 4th, 2003. She worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative for Reckitt Benckiser, a healthcare company. It was a demanding job requiring organization and attention to detail. Colleagues described her as professional and reliable, the kind of person who followed through on commitments. At home, she was a mother to 2 young sons, both in elementary school. Like most working mothers, she juggled schedules and responsibilities, drop-offs, activities, homework help, the endless logistics of raising kids while maintaining a career. From the outside, the DeBates looked like a typical suburban Connecticut family. Nice house, 2 kids, 2 careers. They'd been married for 12 years by December 2015. But marriages are complicated, and this one had fractures that weren't visible from the street. Connie kept notes on her phone, the kind of private writing that people do when they're trying to work through something difficult. One note, dated 2014, was titled, "Why I Want a Divorce." The reasons she listed were specific. Richard's immature behavior, his irresponsibility with money, his poor parenting skills, his failure to care for her emotionally. These weren't vague complaints. They were methodical observations. There was another note, too. A list of reasons to stay. She was weighing both sides, genuinely unsure what to do. Should she leave? Should she try to make it work? What Connie didn't know was that her husband had already made plans of his own, and those plans didn't include her. Richard DeBate was a computer network administrator. He was 40 years old in December 2015. By all appearances, a typical suburban dad. But Richard had a secret. He'd been having an affair. Her name was Sarah Ganser. They'd known each other since junior high school. More than 30 years of history between them. Over those decades, their relationship had been on and off. Sometimes friends, sometimes more. In May 2015, it became physical again. Within a few months, Sarah was pregnant. By December 2015, she was 10 weeks along, carrying Richard's child while he was still married to Connie, still living in the house on Birchview Drive, still playing the role of devoted husband and father. Richard had told Sarah that he and Connie were planning to divorce. It was only a matter of time. he assured her. The marriage was over. They were just working out the details. Sarah believed him. Why wouldn't she? They'd known each other for decades. But Connie's notes suggested a different reality. She hadn't decided yet. She was still weighing her options. The divorce Richard described to his mistress wasn't a done deal. It wasn't even close. The day before Connie was unalived, December 22nd, the couple had an argument over text message. Connie accused Richard of lying about a cable bill. A minor dispute, but it suggested something deeper. She didn't trust him. She was catching him in small lies and confronting him. That night, their 2 sons slept in their beds. The next morning, they went to school. It was the last day before Christmas break. The boys had no idea it would be the last normal morning of their lives. Here's the story Richard told police, to the first responders, the detectives, and eventually a jury. He said he left for work that morning between 8:30 and 8:40. About 5 minutes into his commute, he realized he'd forgotten his laptop. He needed it for work. So he turned around to retrieve it. When he got back to the house, something felt wrong. He heard noises from the second floor. Movement, footsteps. Instead of leaving and calling police, he went upstairs to investigate. That's when he saw him. A large man dressed in camouflage, face covered by a mask. Much bigger than Richard, and a distinctive voice, deep, gravelly, like the actor Vin Diesel. Richard said the intruder overpowered him easily, used some kind of pressure point technique on his wrist to control him, took his wallet. Richard couldn't fight back. The man was too strong, too skilled. Then Connie came home. She'd been at an exercise class at the YMCA. When she entered the house, Richard yelled for her to run. But Connie didn't run. According to Richard, she fled to the basement instead, where Richard kept his guns. She was trying to get a weapon. She was trying to save him. The intruder followed her downstairs, where Richard heard 2 gunshots. The intruder came back up. He zip-tied Richard to a folding chair in the kitchen. He stabbed Richard multiple times with a knife. He burned Richard's arm with a blowtorch. Richard struggled, managed to grab the blowtorch, and burn the intruder's face with it. The pain caused the intruder to flee. That was the story. A masked intruder. A home invasion gone terribly wrong. A husband who tried to warn his wife but couldn't save her. It was detailed. Dramatic. Memorable elements. The Vin Diesel voice, the pressure points, the blowtorch. And none of it was true. While Richard was being treated by EMTs in an ambulance, officers brought in K9 units to track the intruder's scent. If a large man in camouflage had fled the scene on foot, the dogs should be able to pick up his trail. The dogs found a scent immediately, and every time, the trail led back to the same place, the ambulance where Richard was sitting. There was no second scent, no trail leading away from the property, no evidence that anyone other than Richard had been there that morning. Investigators started looking closer at the physical evidence. The first red flag was the lack of forced entry. No broken windows, no kicked-in doors, no pry marks on locks. If an intruder had entered, he'd either picked a lock perfectly or had a key. The second red flag was the gun. Connie had been shot with a Ruger .357 Magnum revolver, a weapon that Richard purchased just 2 months earlier, in October 2015. The gun had never been fired before that morning, and there were no identifiable fingerprints on it. The third red flag was Richard's injuries. He claimed he'd been stabbed multiple times and burned with a blowtorch. But his wounds were superficial. He didn't require stitches or hospitalization. For a violent struggle with a prepared intruder, the injuries were remarkably convenient. But the biggest problem, the detail that would ultimately undo Richard's entire fiction, was the Fitbit. Connie wore a Fitbit 1 fitness tracker. It was a small device about the size of a thumb drive that clipped to clothing. In her case, the waistband of her yoga pants. The Fitbit tracked her steps, flights of stairs climbed, distance traveled, and activity levels throughout the day. The data synced automatically to her account. For investigators, Connie's Fitbit was a silent witness. When they pulled her data from the morning of December 23rd, they found something that contradicted Richard's entire timeline. According to Richard, Connie arrived home and was unalived shortly after 9 a.m. That was when the intruder allegedly followed her to the basement and shot her. But her Fitbit told a different story. The device recorded continuous activity, steps being taken, movement being detected, until 10:05 a.m., more than an hour after Richard said she was gone. During that hour, she walked 1,217 feet inside the house. She climbed stairs. Her activity levels were consistent with a living, moving person. And then, at 10:05 a.m., all activity stopped. No more steps, no more movement. Nothing. That was the actual moment Connie passed. Not 9 a.m. Not during the home invasion Richard described, but more than an hour later. The Fitbit had caught Richard in a lie so fundamental that his entire story collapsed around it. Investigators dug deeper into the digital evidence. Richard claimed he'd pulled over during his commute to email his boss, but his computer activity proved otherwise. The laptop was connected to the home Wi-Fi network the entire time. He'd been checking Connie's gym schedule, browsing ESPN, sending emails, all from inside the house during the time he claimed to be on the road. He never left. The timestamps, IP addresses, and Wi-Fi logs proved it. The home security system confirmed it. The sequence of events Richard described, the timing of doors opening, motion being detected, didn't match his story. Every piece of digital evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Richard had unalived his wife, staged the scene to look like a home invasion, tied himself up, inflicted minor wounds on his own body, and then called for help. Investigators also uncovered Richard's motive. The Narragansett gave birth to their daughter approximately 2 months after Connie was unalived. The pregnancy wasn't a secret, at least not from Richard's perspective. He'd told Sarah they were getting divorced. He'd made it seem like the marriage was effectively over, but the evidence suggested otherwise. Connie was still deciding. She hadn't filed papers. A messy divorce would be complicated. It would expose the affair, divide assets, change custody arrangements. It would blow up Richard's carefully compartmentalized life. But if Connie was gone, if she was the victim of a random home invasion, Richard would inherit everything. The house, the life insurance, the kids, and no one would ever know about the affair until he was ready to reveal it. 2 months before Connie was unalived, Richard purchased a gun. A gun that had never been fired. A gun that would be used exactly once. It took 18 months for police to make an arrest. The investigation was meticulous. Detectives compiled digital evidence, forensic analysis, witness interviews, and financial records. They documented Richard's shifting stories, first claiming Sarah was just a friend, then admitting she was a girlfriend, then finally acknowledging the pregnancy. In April 2017, Richard DeBate was arrested and charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and making false statements to police. He pleaded not guilty and was released on bond. The trial wouldn't happen for another 5 years. COVID-19 delays and legal motions pushed it back again and again. The Fitbit murder case wouldn't see a courtroom until April 2022, nearly 7 years after Connie's passing. The trial lasted approximately 5 weeks. Prosecutors presented their case methodically, walking the jury through each piece of evidence. The Fitbit data, the computer logs, the home security timestamps, the canine tracking that led only to Richard, the gun purchase, the affair, the pregnancy, the lies upon lies upon lies. Sarah Ganzer took the stand and testified about their relationship. She described how they'd reconnected, how she'd become pregnant, how Richard had assured her the marriage was ending. She told the jury she never wanted to break up his family. She was planning to raise their daughter on her own. Richard also testified in his own defense. He stuck to his story. He maintained his innocence. He described the masked intruder, the home invasion, the struggle. He insisted he didn't unalive his wife. His defense attorney pointed to unknown DNA found in the home, including on the murder weapon. A house cleaner testified that she might have seen a dark green figure moving outside the house. The defense argued there was reasonable doubt, but the digital evidence was overwhelming. The Fitbit didn't lie. The computer didn't lie. The timestamps didn't lie. On May 10th, 2022, after less than a full day of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict, guilty on all counts. Murder, tampering with evidence, making false statements to police. Richard DeBate showed no visible reaction when the verdict was read. The sentencing came 3 months later, on August 18th, 2022. Connie's family addressed the court before the judge pronounced sentence. They spoke about who she was, not just a victim in a case file, but a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend. They spoke about the 2 boys who lost their mother 2 days before Christmas, who grew up without her, who would carry that absence forever. The judge sentenced Richard DeBate to 65 years in prison. He was 46 years old. With that sentence, he'll spend the rest of his life behind bars. Richard appealed his conviction, claiming prosecutorial misconduct. In March 2025, the Connecticut Supreme Court acknowledged improprieties, but upheld the conviction anyway. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. Richard DeBate thought he'd planned everything perfectly. He staged the scene. He rehearsed his story. He gave himself visible but minor injuries. He came up with memorable details. An intruder who sounded like a movie star. But he forgot about the Fitbit. He forgot that his wife's own body was keeping a record of its final moments. And that small oversight cost him everything.